sound check first. You guys picking me up okay? Let me know. So good to see all four of you here. I'm in New York. I'm actually in Manhattan. Stephanie, good to see you. Is the sound okay, Stephanie? Okay, that's good. So, Stephanie, great to see you. It's awesome. I guess I'm around the corner from you again. I mean, I have been on the East Coast for a little while, but it's good to see you. Please, guys, vote in the poll if you haven't already. Let's have a look here. Well, 59 watching. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Thought we were 5 a minute ago. So 67% of you say it can be incredibly useful to travel to very close to the scene or into the general area. And then some say, about a third of you say, well, there's some value, right? And then 11%, 1 out of 10 of you say it's not really got any value. Why do you really want to do that? And I do think it's worth talking about, is it really worth anything? I think there is a point to that. So before we get going, and we're going to talk actually about 4 cases, one of them in quite a lot of depth, another one in some depth, and the other 2 not in really that much depth. While I'm kind of getting to that, I want to ask you guys, so we're dealing with 4 cases. What do you think those 4 cases are that all play out in Indiana? I'm sure that many of you can name one of them. I'm sure that some of you can name, and I mean, it's obviously in the title, another one of them, and a third of them, but can you think of a 4th case that also plays out in Indiana? Crime Geek says it has to be the actual scene. Some think a crime scene is one place when it was at another. Not quite sure what you mean by that. What do you mean by the actual crime scene? Not quite sure if I follow. So you're saying it's only worth going if you sort of standing in the room where crime occurred. Can you just elaborate on what you mean there? What do you mean by the actual scene? Do you mean kind of like the room? What is like the beginning and end of a crime scene? I'd just be curious to see what you say. And what do the rest of you guys say? Erin says the Fox Hollow murders. Iceland, good to see you here as well. SM Kovalinsky, good to see you. I'm actually going to be meeting SM Kovalinsky in a couple of days, so that should be quite exciting. SM Kovalinsky, no, don't say where we're going to be meeting. Let's keep that a surprise. Stephanie says, I've missed you all so much. Okay, I've also missed you. Pamela says, dust in the wind. Okay. I mean, that is generally true. You do want to have the basic area of the crime scene, right? Some of us could not reach the bottom selection. That's too bad. Don Spencer, good to have you here as well. Where the wind blows says the area is important as well. Brittany says, I said there's some value, but I want to hear more from people who said it can be very useful. I don't disagree, but want to hear more. Well, Brittany, I think you're going to find this potentially quite interesting. I do want to ask you, hopefully if you stick around till the end, what you think. So I hope to see your name a little bit later on. Elizabeth says, in the Murdoch case, it made a great impact. So is there another case where going to the scene wouldn't really have made an impact? I mean, A good example is the Gabby Petito case. Where is the scene of the crime? And it's going all the way there, basically to stones and mountains. And what's the point of going all the way there? Is there really any point? Sharon, good to see you as well. Kevin says, I live within an hour and a half of the Zodiac Killer crime scenes, and seeing them in real life is way different than old pictures and even videos, more in depth. There's kind of an early clue to what we're talking about. In depth. Where the wind blows is I always want to know where it happened. Where's one of the biggest questions in true crime? When is another very big question. You might say, when? Well, it happened on that day. No. Exactly at what time did it happen? Also, exactly at what point did it happen? But you could even take it to where did the psychology start festering? Did it start festering at the crime scene, or did it fester in someone's childhood, or in a certain cultural fabric? And so it becomes a much bigger and broader question. Do you see that? Alina, I'm very well aware that the notification is out. I'm not quite sure. It's been a problem while I've been in America. I think it's because StreamYard, when you sign up for it, it locks in your location wherever you are in the world, and so you can't change that location, which is very frustrating, unless I've missed something. Brittany says, I'm fading, but I'll definitely try to stay up. Okay. So let me reiterate the question I asked right at the beginning. We're going to be dealing with 4 cases in this discussion. How many of you know what the 4th case is? So 3 of them are mentioned in the title, but there's one that's not mentioned in the title. How many of you can guess right that there's a 4th high-profile case that sort of, if I say this, you're going to know what it is, that has that, how can I put it? Okay, I'll just say it passes through Indiana. Should make it very easy. No, it's not Summer Wells. Elizabeth says sometimes there are multiple crime scenes within the crime scene. That can also be true. No, not Heidi Jones. Well, we are going to be talking about Delphi, but it's besides Delphi. Okay, so I want to, just by way of introduction to this whole thing, I want to sort of address this idea of maybe it has absolutely no value. Because I can tell you now, for example, when I visited the Ramsey home in Boulder, you can't go inside the home, so does it really have any value, right? So there is a legitimate thing to that. Another thing is, are you ever getting, if a crime scene or a home where something happened, if you go 5 months, 10 months, 10 years, 20 years into the future, is there really any point to going there when you've got often video inside, you've got body cam? Is there really any point? And there's definitely an argument for that you can get a heck of a lot of information without leaving your desk, and you can kind of just be a keyboard warrior. There definitely is an argument for that. But what I want to also tell you is, as a true crime researcher, as someone who's written dozens of books, it's also important to challenge yourself in the real world. You can challenge yourself with these cases. You can try and figure things out. But I can tell you, coming to America and just traveling in America for 2 months, forget about the true crime, has been a challenge. I haven't touched wood because I've got one more flight to catch. I haven't missed a single flight, and you might say, so what? That's not so hard. But when you are every time flying from a different airport, and now you're starting to drive to the airport in a rental, and the airports are getting more complicated, bigger, and you're also becoming more, what's the word? You're becoming not complacent, but the idea that you need to be there so many hours ahead of time now becomes, well, I want to arrive at the airport just in time. So you start cutting it finer and finer. What I'm trying to say is you become more effective in your interaction with the landscape and your ability to function in a different environment, the longer the time you spend in that sort of situation. I'm just talking in terms of travel. Um, and so I can tell you that I'm in New York now, I'm back in New York. When I first arrived in New York, I ordered I think I thought it was a taxi. But they picked me up in a black Mercedes Benz with the steering kind of out of alignment, and I think it cost me about $100. And now, when I arrived, I knew exactly the layout of LaGuardia. Um, it's my third time to the airport. I think I landed in JFK, and I've since been to LaGuardia twice. I think that's right. Anyway, now I was able to catch a Uber, and it cost almost half the price, and I kind of knew where to go, and no muss, no fuss. And so you're ready, more effective, you're less anxious, and you kind of know what you're doing. The same thing kind of applies when you start getting to know not only a crime scene, but the area around it. You know, what are the points of interest, almost like tourist attractions, but what are the things that I need to see? And you have a better sense of that, not only when you know the crime scene, but also when you're on site. So a very good example is Delphi, where when you get there, you need to know that area really well to know, well, at what point do I need to leave the path in order to figure out what I need to figure out, kind of thing, right? Um, that is correct. The Morphews did live in Indiana. They left Indiana for Colorado. Uber is expensive, but it's less expensive than a taxi. SM Kobolinsky says, I still think there's value in going. Now you are going to get lots of little insights into why it does actually make sense to visit these places. I think some people can visit these places and take absolutely nothing away from it. In other words, someone who maybe is looking for DNA, or someone who's looking for smoking gun type evidence. I'm more of a psychological researcher, so I'm not only looking for practical aspects in terms of the style. For example, one thing that surprised me at both 1122 King Road and the Ramsey home were they were both much smaller buildings than I expected. Um, and that's already kind of giving you a sense that your intuitive proportions were actually somewhat off. And so by actually going there, you realize, well, the house wasn't actually that big. Thanks a lot, Pamela. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys one more time, and then I'm going to break the ice. What is the fourth case that plays out or that goes through Indiana, right? So Delphi, and then we're going to talk about that at the end of this discussion. We're going to go through the first three very quickly, so it'll be most of the discussion. Barry Morphew, that is where the Morphews met, went to school, fell in love, and then ultimately left for Colorado. So that's the second case, right? And Bryan Kohberger, you know that he went through Indiana, right? So I'll give you a hint, and it's really not. If I give you this hint, it really shouldn't be that hard. The best example of the case that we're talking about is the Bryan Kohberger case. So what happened to Bryan Kohberger in Indiana? Well, something similar happened to someone else. It's a similar situation. Let's see what you guys say. Marlon Rando says Gabby or Valo. You're going to have to pick one of them. Erin says the Ramseys lived in Indiana too. There you go. We've got a winner. We've got a winner. So, did you know? And obviously, the picture you have on screen isn't Indiana's Monument Rocks, but it's one of the questions you've kind of got to ask yourself when you write books on true crime. I guess also when you are a true crime creator and you've got to start your narrative somewhere and you've got to start figuring things out somewhere. You've kind of got to ask the question, where did this start? Where did this journey, the psychological journey start, or where did the fabric of this case start? Where do we begin our analysis? Where did everything begin? Right. And I think there's a core to things where things are building momentum and things are happening rapidly, the fast burn and the triggering and all that. But I think there's also a much slower psychological journey that's also taking place where the bricks are being laid for the future criminal psychology. And so the Gabby Petito case is a great example where you say, when did things start going wrong? Did they start going wrong in Moab? Did they start going wrong at Mary Piglet's? Did they start going wrong at the campsite? Or do you sort of start going backwards? Do we go back from the Grand Tetons? Do we go back from Moab? Do we go back to where? Where do we go back to? And the picture you see on screen right now is the very first Instagram post that Gabby put up in terms of that van life adventure, and it's dated July 5th, 2021, right? Before that, it's this image, which is March 27, 2021. So as far as Gabby was concerned, their journey started at Monument Rocks in Kansas, but that's not actually where their journey started, right? And you've got to be a more sophisticated true crime researcher than to simply say, well, because their social media starts at that point, I'm going to start at that point. You've got to have more insight than that. And I think since I've done a really long trip, I think it's quite a good way to introduce what I'm trying to get at, is that you spread your fingers very, very far into the psychological fabric. You don't just limit it to the box of the crime scene or the house of the crime scene or the apron around that, the garden, or even the neighborhood, or even just the town. You want to go to where did this journey start? Did the person live in another place? And often, I almost want to say without exception, but so often in true crime, it relates to someone coming from somewhere else, and then they can't adapt. They won't adapt. The fairy tale blows up. The fairy tale that they developed somewhere else, they take into a different environment and it just doesn't work out, and they can't handle that. Does that make sense? So if we go back to Gabby Petito, we go from this is Kansas, Monument Rocks in Kansas, and then we then go to kind of the familiar things, Colorado, Great Sand Dunes. There's some more Great Sand Dunes, and you can see it now. It's starting to be more and more coverage in the same spot, Zion National Park, and so on. And of course, I've gone to all of these places now as well. And so the question then comes up, what route did Gabby and Bryan take? And there you can see a map on screen. It's not a very good map. Let me just blow it up. And it's not, I don't think it's really adequate, but there you have, there's the starting point in New York. So bear in mind, the journey actually would have started in Florida, then they went up to New York, and then that's really where the actual journey, I guess, began. And in a way, I've followed that same journey today. I went from Georgia to New York, except by plane, not by car. I have traveled in this sort of area, but some of Gabby's social media is also set in Georgia and the Appalachian Trail. Anyway, they went by van from New York, right? And there in Kansas, can you see that where the cursor is? That's where the Monument Rocks are, and then to the Great Sand Dunes, and then all of this activity here. But can you see how kind of all the social media activities concentrated essentially in the west of the country, but especially over the Rockies in this sort of area. But it starts here in Kansas. And how many people have sort of thought, well, what about the journey before that? Where were they before they were in Kansas? Well, they were in Missouri. You might say, well, if they left from Florida, didn't they go through Alabama or Mississippi or Arkansas? And that would be a valid thing to ask if you were a little misinformed, because they didn't go. I mean, Brian Laundrie went straight back to Florida, after everything happened. But they departed New York, and it's a similar journey in a way to the one I made when I arrived in America. I went along the top, the northern part of America, more north than they did. And then I came back down this sort of way. And I'll take you guys through that at some point. But if you look at this map, where were they before they were in Kansas? Well, they were in Missouri. Where were they? And here's the answer. Okay, and then where were they before that? Illinois. And before that, Indiana. Right? So they went through all of these states: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri. And so they'd already done a heck of a long journey before he started posting on Instagram. Do you see that? Amy Cakes, good to see you. Mojo says the actual room would be most helpful, the area not so much. So let me ask you, Mojo, do you think a true crime researcher is going to get access to the room? Like, so if I want to go into the rooms of 112 King Road, do you think I can? Do you think anyone can? Let me just ask you, like, if that's the ideal, do you think it's realistic? And so if you can't go into the room, should you just stay at home? I'm just asking you what you think about that. Lisa B says, just got a great time to end my birthday. Oh, happy birthday. Guys, it's Lisa's birthday. Let's all wish her. Hope you've had a wonderful day, and I'm really glad that I'm here on such a, auspicious occasion for you. Erin says, I'm having a hard time seeing why Indiana would be a big thing in this. It's not really a big thing in the Gabby Petito thing, but it'll become a bigger thing in the next case, and the next case, and the next case. I guess the point is, and when I start showing you photos, you'll get my point, is the commitment Gabby and Bryan were making. So by the time the Moab stop happened at point number 4, they'd already come a really, really long way together. So it wasn't like Gabby and Bryan were just driving around in Moab, in Utah, and the police stopped them and she was crying. And so you might just say, why didn't she just say he was hitting her and then go home? Well, because they'd come a heck of a long way, and the adventure was only just starting in Moab, right? Do you see that? In other words, can you see how the context really matters, right? The other thing just to point out in terms of Indianapolis is kind of like, it feels like a lot of roads. It's known as the crossroads state of America. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that in a moment. I just want to show you another map of the Gabby, and this one's a much better and more detailed map. Let's take myself out of the picture and just blow it up a little bit more. Right? Departed New York. I think that date's wrong. I don't think it was actually June, so that's actually wrong. New York, then they went through Pittsburgh, Columbus, Ohio. They went through Indianapolis. I did as well. And then St. Louis, and then through to Monument Rocks, and then it gets pretty detailed. But can you see how it's a long ribbon where nothing much happens? And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the point I'm trying to make here is, what is the most unspoken part? Cotton, so great to see you here as well. What is the most unspoken part of the Gabby Petito story is this whole section here. It's easy to forget that they'd come a really, really long way. And what happened during this part? Did they argue during this part? Were they making plans during that part? Were they really getting along well during this part? And so if things were going really, really great during this sort of section, um, maybe they were actually kind of on a real honeymoon, and they were very, very happy together. And then when there were arguments, that they were so much more painful to deal with because they'd been getting along so well prior to that. And everything had worked so well prior to that. Can you see what I'm sort of getting at? House of Solomon says, I'm 15 minutes from the laundry home, creepy driving by the park where they found Bryan. Yeah, that's a really good point as well. So if a photo is worth 1,000 words, being at the scene is worth 1,000,000. I could spend more time talking about the Gabby Petito case and I mean, I really got to be, um, I really got to be, sort of share my heartfelt feelings is that I'm here largely because of Gabby Petito's story. I'm here in America because her story inspired me. The national, I never really realized how beautiful America was until I looked at the national parks that she was traveling to, because I'm that kind of person. I like nature. I came to America to really see those national parks. The crime aspect was actually secondary, right? And Zion National Park was stupendous. Like, I thought South Africa had canyons and whatever, and they're little baby pipsqueaks compared to America. And that, what an incredible thing to to realize that the world is both more amazing and in another sense not as frightening or as vast as you thought. So you sort of comprehending the world, even as a 50 something, you comprehending the world that little bit better. And it's been really interesting meeting my own patrons who haven't gotten out there. They live in America and they haven't really gotten out and realized, wow, you've gone to these places, we visited you in these places, we need to be doing that more. And I do want to encourage you guys to do that more. So that then brings us to Bryan Kohberger. And I think when we talk about Kohberger, I'm just going to um, take you through just a couple of slides. So I think that was my bed in Indianapolis. Some of you may know I actually went to the Indy 500, and all of these places have a different pull. They resonate in a different way. All of these places trigger different parts of anybody. There's certain things that you like about certain places and certain things that you don't like. So that is the sign, I guess, I was following on my way to Delphi. Let's do it like this. And I mean, that is a psychology in itself. It's, do you follow the road signs? Do you notice them? I'm talking about Gabby and Bryan. What was their attention to detail in terms of following signs? You might say, well, just follow your navigator. Just put the things into your phone and follow that. Okay, right? Then what happens when your battery runs flat or for whatever reason there's no signal and you can't rely on that, because that does also happen. Do you follow what I'm saying? If to the extent that you're completely dependent on your phone and whatever, well, when you can't use it, then what do you do? When all of that sort of lets you down, what do you do? The other thing is, your navigator is not going to be able to tell you that that's the place on the map that, wow, I really wanted to go. That's the place on the map that I really wanted to see. And that's happened to me a couple of times. You put into your navigator where you want to go, and you realize afterwards, sorry, Big sneeze. Sorry, I actually, for the first time today, wore a facial mask on the plane. Because there was a guy coughing every 30 seconds, every minute. There's a guy coughing 2 feet away from me. So I was just like, I'm going to be a little bit careful here. John says smart people would know the towns always nearby. Thanks for going to Delphi. Hopefully I didn't miss too much about it. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is you get this experience when you travel, is that you need to, especially when you're moving, you need to kind of have an effective way of getting through the landscape. So your navigator, what time am I going to get there? What's the best route? But you also want to be going to where you want to be going. And your navigator can't tell you that. And when I was in South Carolina with Laurie and somebody else, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to sort of give everyone's names, but for privacy reasons. But after we met at Luther's Grill, we were sort of like, well, what should we do now? And it was only the next day that I realized we should have gone to Hunter's Island. And it was because my familiarity with the area had increased slightly from the previous day. So it's not really enough just to, if you're trying to do a kind of journey that Gabby and Bryan were trying to do, which is go to the best places, but not necessarily just tick off the tourist spots, then you're going to need to maintain that sort of awareness. And that's where it gets tricky, because one person says, I want to go there, and another person says, I don't. One person says, I want to go there, and the other person says, we can't afford to go there, or we don't have time, right? Okay, so that's the vehicle that I was using. And the vehicle is also going to give you all sorts of other insights into the journey. How expensive is the vehicle? This is in terms of Gabby Petito, but it's also one of the biggest insights I think I learned from this trip is that if you want to go and find out about, if I was a police officer and you want to go and find out about somebody who lived in a particular area, especially if it's fairly rural, like Salida, but also Delphi. One of the first places I think you would want to go is the nearest gas station. A gas station is, if you've got a vehicle, a gas station is where most people go regularly, and people tend to know the regulars in terms of their faces and in terms of their vehicles. And that'll already start giving you a sense of their patterns and that sort of thing. And so, is there any footage, for example, of Gabby and Bryan at a gas station? I'm sure there might be. Of course, we did get the footage of them at that grocer's in was it Jackson Hole, where they were buying things. Well, there's me, same thing. So this is just some of what I saw along the way. These little houses along the way. We're going to get to Morphew, Bryan Kohberger in a second. So that just gives you a bit of a sense of the reality of being in Indiana. It has been pretty challenging. Okay, so I've got a pretty simple question to ask you guys. Remember, we dealt with the 2 police stops, and they were both in Indiana with Bryan Kohberger. let's have a show of hands. If you think those police stops were random, were totally kind of not by accident, but basically without any kind of design, right? Then put a 1. And if you think those stops were organized, premeditated, someone gave the order that they must stop them there, put it 2. Let's see what you guys say. Kathy says, did you have a US license to rent cars? No, I had an international driver's license. Lisa says strategic stop. So we've got quite a mixed bag here. 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. And it's quite interesting to see there's not agreement amongst you guys. Never heard of that before. Okay. Jean says I'm behind, lagging, had an ad. Okay, so I think it's a fascinating question. Did the cops stop Bryan Kohberger randomly? And I think the official position of the police is that, yes, they did. And so it becomes, yes, they randomly stopped him, not once, but twice, right? And then the other side of it is, well, if it wasn't random, why just not say so? I mean, would it be such a big deal just to say because they were tailing him, we know that. We were tailing him, we'd actually lost him before. We wanted to know where the hell he was going. Maybe we want to make sure that it was the right vehicle, whatever. Blah, 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 right? Yeah, stop for tailgating. So this now addresses the question of, let's go back to, and I want to be a little bit sarcastic when I say it, so excuse me. How much value is there in visiting the scene or even the general area? How much is that worth, right? So now you say, so why did the police stop Bryan Kohberger when he was driving across country, right? I've just driven across country. I've driven right across Idaho. I've driven east to west, south to north. I've driven right through, although Terry also drove to some extent, Oregon, but I've driven right through California, right through Arizona. I've driven, I wouldn't say right through Colorado, but I've driven significant 4 hours worth through Colorado. I've driven right through South Carolina. I've driven through parts of Georgia, right? So I've driven all over America, right? And while I was in South Africa, I was thinking the problem for me is I don't know practically what the sort of police situation is like. Like, do the police tend to just stop people left, right, and center? And to be honest, when I came to America, I was a little bit worried. Am I going to be stopped? Or are the police going to misunderstand me? You know, if the police do stop me and I scratch my nose, are they going to be like, he's got a gun, he's got an effing gun? And it's like, no, I was just scratching my nose. He's saying something, we don't know what he's saying. Do you know what I mean? So I was actually quite worried about that. And having been in America for 2 months, I wasn't stopped once. Unless you count the point where was I? I think it was, I think I was coming from, I think I was in Utah, so I've also driven extensively through Utah. I was coming from Moab, and they were transporting a very oversized thing on the road, and there was a police cruiser in front of it who sort of approached me just to say, "Can you make way?" And that's basically the only stop that sort of happened to me, right? So, in other words, I've become now a little bit more familiar with driving in America. What did Gabby and Bryan do? They drove through America. They drove great distances through America. I've got a bit of a better idea what that's like. You might say, yeah, but that's not the crime scene. Yeah, but it is being in a car for quite a long time in different environments. What's the cell signal like in this state, in that state, on that road, in that situation? Um, and so, of course, I also drove through Indiana. And were the cops more or less vigilant or whatever in Indiana? I couldn't really tell you. Or was the police presence? I did see police cars there. What was the police presence better or worse? Couldn't really tell you. I mean, the Indy 500s there, they seem to like cars. If anything, I think they tended to drive quite. Some states that keep to the speed limit, very close to the speed limit, and others go over it, like some amount of 5-10 miles per hour over the speed limit, whereas others will stick to it quite religiously. Misa Mom says cars are rarely stopped. You've been watching the wrong news. It's not that I've been watching the wrong news. Kohberger was stopped. So the question is that, and also Gabby and Bryan were stopped. And what makes a lot of the news is that sort of thing. The other thing that I think you've got to look at is maybe I was lucky, or maybe I was unlucky, or maybe it was just strange. But I've asked other people while I've been in America, including my friend Webb, who lives in California, and he says in the entire time he's lived here, I think over 20 years, something like 20 years, he's only been stopped once. That's not a lot of stopping. And so that, from what he said and what some other people have said, and from my own experience, my personal opinion, which is now quite informed, is that I think Bryan was stopped because someone gave the order. It could be that I'm wrong. I mean, I can't prove it either way. Maybe it'll come out in court. But my feeling is that I think it's more likely that somebody gave the instruction to stop him. Do you agree with that? Yeah, I mean, there you go. Misa Mom says, I've never been stopped in 50 years. Where the wind blows says, so maybe you're in a different state. But in South Carolina, I was told that you can get stopped quite easily because it might pay for wages. So it depends from state to state. But the question is Indiana. What happens in Indiana? That's also true. That's also true. It's a good point. Misa Mom says you can go 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Okay. But if you think about it, Kohberger wasn't just stopped twice. He was also on body cam in Washington. And then you saw what happened there. And then he was also stopped another time with a seatbelt. Right. So that's actually 4 stops in a fairly short space of time. And so that's another thing. So the culture of he gets stopped and he kind of gets away with it. Right. Obviously, the other 2 stops happened after the incident, but you have a stop and you kind of get away with it. And then what is your opinion then of law enforcement? Are they toothless, or am I able to, if I say certain things, then it's really nothing to worry about, right? Let's see what you guys are saying. Zircon says seatbelt gets you over time. John Hammer says often 15 or over highway, very short staffed. So I must also tell you, it wasn't like I was driving through America and I never saw cop cars. I saw them all over the place. And honestly, in the beginning, when I was driving, like sometimes it would be late at night and I would not have water in my hotel, or I would want to go out for whatever reason late at night, like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I sort of felt Jeepers, if there's a time I'm going to get stopped, it's now. It's like, sir, what are you doing driving around at 2 o'clock at night, kind of thing. And so I drove. I remember doing that in Jackson Hole, driving around really early in the morning, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. A little bit lost actually, even though it's such a small place. And there were cop cars here and there. And there it's quite strictly policed the speed limit, because it's the wild animals all over the place. In Boulder, there was a cop car right at my hotel. I stayed at the Millennium Hotel. There was a cop car there. I'm not actually sure what that was about. I was actually going to ask, and I just kind of forgot. But even when I went, I needed change to do laundry. Just going from my hotel to, in the end, I got change at the McDonald's. There were cop cars in that short little area. And I saw cop cars yesterday in the Beaufort area. In fact, when when I was with Laurie and her partner, um, I just mentioned to them, well, there's a police car in our parking lot, and then when one would pass us down the road, and I'm just very aware of that. In fact, when I got off the flight today, I thought I saw an air marshal, and I was just trying to make sure that, I don't know, I'm just trying to confirm that I think it is an air marshal, and I think he saw me looking at him, and then he sort of looked back at me like, "Why are you looking at me?" Um, but America, to its credit, has got quite a good police presence all over, and that means people try to behave compared to if there's not a police presence. Marilu says, I was stopped once and I cried and I got out of the ticket. I was a young mom who had a baby crying, and he felt bad for me. So something that's quite interesting, and I don't want to talk too much about it here because it's not really corroborated, but uh, um, I had a really interesting conversation when I was in Boulder with Jean Karras, and Jean said that she'd actually found, I'm not going to give names, I just don't have any problems, but Jean said that there was a report on Weld County that someone had been pulled over and there was an incident, and it's related to something that happened in Frederick, and then that case was actually pulled. That case appeared, and then it was the citation was removed. And I also found that quite interesting. And all of this has just got to do with driving and traffic and that sort of thing. And so for me, it's just interesting being an American, driving around, getting a little bit of an idea of what is actually normal in this country compared to somewhere else, right? Deborah D, is it your birthday as well? Wow. Happy birthday. And happy birthday to Stephanie's son. What did Elizabeth say? Stephanie says he's going to be 11. Okay. He loves pushing law enforcement. Okay. They observe, they show presence. Okay. So I'm going to take you through just a few more scenes from Indiana. And I've got to say it was from after I left the national parks of um, Utah, I would say, that I started seeing no trespassing signs all over the place. It was in Colorado, you start seeing them quite a lot. In Indiana, they were all over the place. And yeah, it kind of just got worse. In South Carolina also, we were very much so on the Murdoch properties as well. So I just want to take some photos of like this of farmhouses and just the setting, and all over the place are these no entry signs. Can you see these birds flying over here? So now we're gonna move over from. We've spoken a little bit about Gabby Petito. Um, we've spoken a little bit about Bryan Laundry, right? And now we're gonna sort of touch on Barry Morphew. And I think this is an area where you guys can legitimately say, I don't know what the hell you were doing in Alexandria, Indiana. I don't know what you were doing there. The crime happened in uh, Maysville near Salida in Colorado. What the hell are you doing hundreds of miles away, right? And the answer to that is, I'm just wondering, what was it like growing up here? What was it like being from Indiana and then going to Colorado? And the irony was, I just done that thing in reverse. I flew from Denver to Indianapolis, right? So I was kind of going directly from the Great Sand Dunes and all that to Indiana, and I was like, what 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 did it maybe feel like to be somewhere else compared to here? In other words, what is a place like when you are from somewhere else? Or what is somewhere else like when you are from another place? And that's also really relevant. And that's why if you say, I don't understand why on earth you would even bother to go somewhere, it's got nothing to do with anything, except that it does. Where you are from, especially where you grow up as a child, creates a kind of formative psychology. It tends to shape your standards, it tends to shape your expectations, it tends to shape, in a way, the culture that you most gravitate to. It might even be your politics. It tends to make who you are in a way. And that really has a greater impact than most of us realize. And so when you go from that and now you're in a different culture, and make no mistake, when you're in different states in America, there are real cultural differences. You realize, well, either you've got to adapt, or you're going to feel a little like an outsider or a lot like an outsider. And especially if you a couple from somewhere else traveling to another place, are you going to, your culture as a couple, is that going to work in this other place, right? And that's exactly the situation with Barry Morphew and Suzanne Morphew, right? Barry was the golden boy. He was this kind of sporting legend. He was this big shot. And Suzanne was this sort of playing second fiddle. And so in Colorado, how would that be? Do wives normally play second fiddle in Colorado? I don't know. You know what I mean? And so I was just curious to see and feel and just get a sense of, in a way, the culture of Indiana. And you might say, well, a day or 2 days isn't going to be enough to do that. And you might be right. Maybe it's not. How much is enough time? A week, a month, or is it never enough time? Did you have to have been born there? So these are the sort of things that I was sort of just paying attention to. And obviously, you're dealing with a farming landscape. Um, you know, and what kind of landscape is a farming landscape compared to somewhere else? Another landscape in true crime that's, I guess, associated is kind of Rexburg, Idaho, that sort of area. Large parts of Idaho are farming communities. What kind of people are farming communities? Like generally, all over the world, what kind of people are farming communities compared to urban communities, right? And so if you from a farm and you move to um, a town or a city, what kind of change does that bring about? And so I eventually, well, I think I'm going to talk about Delphi in a moment. I don't want to quite deal with that right now. We're going to get to that. I just want to deal with some other images. So these were some pictures I took on the way to Alexandria, which is where Barry, it's a town quite close to where Barry and Suzanne lived, right? And you just kind of get a sense in the layout of these towns of the culture that's sort of taking place there. And that's what I'm just trying to feel, is I'm trying to feel the American spirit, how it changes in different areas. What was it? What is it? What is it going to be? Okay. And so there's not really much more to say about that other than I kind of just got a sense of Barry's, the fabric that Barry and Suzanne came from. And I kind of just felt like Howie's, because they were still staying in quite a rural setting in Colorado. Basically, a lot more spectacular, a lot more vertical, a lot more high mountains. But obviously, there's a bit of a different attitude to things in Colorado than there is to things in Indiana. Um, a, a big insight that I felt like I got driving the same route that Barry drove in the dark to Broomfield, which is right next to Boulder, was just how erratic and poor the cell service was. So I really got a very clear sense of that, just that on its own. How if you wanted to check his phone for what he was doing or where he was, it would have been quite difficult. I mean, the whole way. Stairway says, I would have met him in Indiana if he was there. Would you have? Uh, no, I'm sorry. I'm on my way out. I'm leaving America in a couple of days, so not much chance of that. But who knows later on. Okay, so what's next here? So that is actually getting quite close to um, Alexandria, and I was really touched by these. This is Memorial Day, the Memorial Day weekend. I was really touched by these posters on the street lamps, just honoring the fallen soldiers. I was very struck by how on one day in Indiana, it really looked like this perfect place. It looked like this fairy tale place. And I was even thinking, wow, it must be so wonderful living here. You know, everything's so pretty and neat and taken care of. And the lawns, you know, the rolling fields look like golf courses. And it's just beautiful. And then the next day was like really cloudy, and it suddenly didn't feel, it felt totally different. It felt kind of oppressive and dull. And it was almost like the feeling I had the previous day that it was so attractive and I wanted to belong to it. By the next day, it had completely passed, and I was kind of bored, and I was like, okay, what's next? And I wonder whether that's not a brief analogy for what happened to Barry and Suzanne, where they grew up in this wonderful, you know, uh, what's the word, in the bosom of this farming community, and they had a great life. They had a great childhood, and they had a great high school life. But then it just seemed a little like too small town America for them. It just seemed like maybe there could be a little bit more than that. And we know that that is exactly how Suzanne felt, that she wanted more. And then so it did seem like there's that aspect to Indiana. Um, Indiana, like I say, I really thought it was beautiful, but I read somewhere that it was voted the most. I think I need to, before I say something. It was voted the most what? Indiana voted most. Voted one of the least fun states in the country. Now, I'm not trying to knock Indiana. I'm just saying that's something that I read about, right? Can you guys see that? Let's do that. So I'm not trying to knock Indiana. I loved it. I took a lot of photos, and I did come across this article while I was there. Indiana ranked among the most boring states, and then like why? And then they say, um, I don't know. I'm not quite sure why. Anyway, you guys can read this article if you're interested. But the point is that a reason why Barry and Suzanne left? It wasn't exciting enough for them. And did they get that excitement in the end in Colorado? And you can take that even further. Isn't that why Shanann Watts and Chris Watts left the state they were in? Did they find it boring? Right? Mad Hatter, I don't think it's really right saying boring people. I think it's also got to do with the environment. Is there a lot to do there? There you go. It's John Cougar Mellencamp's home. So, if you think about, that's quite an interesting point. Yeah, they call it the crossroads. If you think about the fact that Suzanne Morphew had an affair, isn't that also kind of tying in with this idea that I want excitement in my life? You know what I mean? Can you see that? In other words, I want excitement, so I leave the state to go somewhere else, but I still don't have excitement in my life, and then I have an affair, right? You see what I'm trying to get at? Anyway, if you think I'm wrong or whatever, I've got some more footage to share with you, and you can decide for yourself. I'm not trying to knock anyone. I'm simply trying to understand the people that come from these places. Now, one thing you can actually see in this image, there were some kids. You can just barely see them here. There were some teenagers here that were taking photos on the steps of this building. This is the town hall, right? Oh, sorry, the city hall. And I couldn't help seeing them and just thinking, like, how happy are you guys here? Are you guys having a great life here? And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. But I'm just saying, on my way through Alexandria, I saw these kids, and this is what they were doing on their sort of Memorial Day weekend, right? So this is just a quick scene inside Alexandria. Okay. So again, these were some other places that I photographed, and actually after I'd photographed it, a guy pulled up next to me and he said, "Do you know who owns this place?" And I said, "No." And he said, because he also wants to know, he also wants to take photos, and he was literally the neighbor. Quite weird. So that's really kind of the issue: is what was it like living here? What was it like growing up here? What was it like being a farmer or someone? Bear in mind what Barry's job was. He sort of owned what's the word? He he had like a landscape business, but he also grew trees. Didn't he sell trees to the locals or something like that? So I'm not going to kind of answer the question. The question is really just, what was it like for Barry and Suzanne to live here, and why possibly did they leave here? And I've heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, I've heard that Barry's since returned, that Barry's back in Indiana. Let me just see if I can find anything about that. I don't know if it's true. I just heard someone said that. Yeah, so I don't actually know for a fact where Barry's living now, but um, this is former Indiana man speaks out. I wonder if it says, it says the Morphews are formerly from Alexandria, Indiana. And just that simple thing is a question. Does where someone is from have any influence on anything? Anyway, so that's kind of a fairly recent article. So we've now dealt with Gabby, Petito, and Bryan, their long journey, and that it started much earlier. What impact did that have on everything? We've also dealt with Bryan Kohberger, and just, is it normal to be stopped twice in 10 minutes or whatever it is? Anyway, stopped twice in one day in Indiana. Well, I wasn't stopped at all in Indiana, and I was kind of driving, and then I'd stop and I'd do a U-turn and park somewhere and pull off here, and not really the most seamless driving that's going on. Um, and yeah, I mean, I saw police vehicles while I was driving. Some other vehicles were pulled over. I saw cruisers in and around Delphi as well. Again, the question is, did growing up in Alexandria have anything to do with the circumstances in Colorado? Are there hunters and is there the same sort of attitude to the land and landscaping and whatnot in Indiana as it is as there was in that part of Colorado? So just those sort of things that I was thinking about, and I could write a book about it. I've got a lot of thoughts on it. But we're now going to move on to kind of the central subject here, which is Delphi. And that's where I guess I spent the most time and attention in terms of coming to Indiana. So let's go to Delphi. I'm going to play that again and just give you guys a second to absorb that. So I kind of got the same sense with Delphi as well. I arrived there, I thought, what a pretty little town, blah, blah, blah. And then when I went back there the next day, I sort of felt like, wow, I've sort of saw, it felt like I saw all there was to see in the town in one day. And then I sort of felt like, well, do I really need to be here much longer? And then I did return there and I did look at certain other things, but you do sort of wonder if you lived somewhere maybe you're missing something, but if you lived somewhere, couldn't you possibly get bored? Couldn't you possibly, and if that does happen, what do you do with that? If you're somewhere and you're bored, some people say idleness is the devil's workshop. If you're somewhere and you're bored, you've done all the hiking trails, you've done everything that's in that area. What do you then do? Do you what do you do with your time? What do you do with your energy? Right? Okay, let's go on to the next thing. Because I want to just take you through this. So this is a really good example of the limits of um, following your navigator, right? So I um, I was coming from Indianapolis, and at some point in my navigator, I simply put in um, Monon High Bridge, right? And so what happened was my vehicle took me to the bridge, but guess what? It took me to um, the private side, the private property side. And I mean, it was the side that ideally I actually wanted to go to because that's kind of where the crime scene is, and that's really where I wanted to get to. And of course, even though my navigator was saying it's right there, I quickly started passing private property signs and no trespassing signs. They're kind of screaming at you. And eventually, when I was so close to the bridge, there was like trespassers will be prosecuted signs, and like I don't know, they were getting more and more sort of extreme, these signs. The warnings were getting worse and worse. And then eventually I passed like through a gate, and there was a lady riding kind of a mower. I saw a lot of those in Indiana, people sort of mowing the spring, the grass that was sort of growing after the rain. And so I was driving and I stopped and I backed up not very far, and I said, "Can I? I'm assuming this is a public road because my navigator is taking me right there." And I say, "Is this a public road?" And she says, "No, it's a private road. You're not allowed to go down there." And I just like, wow, okay, great. And so you've got to go all the way out of that area to get to the other side, and then I'll tell you what happened when I did that. Yeah, that's right. That's correct. So, Stairway says you all are so much fun. Um, the thing that I think people don't appreciate is when you do try and make the effort, it's actually quite hard. It's not like you just snap your fingers and you were exactly where you want to be. It's effort. It costs money. It costs time. It requires planning. You need there to be light, you preferably sunlight, the sun shining. And I don't know, just in terms of this in particular, it was actually quite difficult. What does Sarah say? Okay, so something else that I just want to mention while it's in my mind is uh, I thought there were a heck of a lot of churches all over the place in Indiana. I think the only place I've been in that had more churches are the woods of South Carolina. Like you go around a corner, and the only building there is a church. It's not like a church and a couple of houses. It's like a church, and then you go a little bit further, and there's another church, not even that far away. And then you go a little bit further, and there's another church. So I was really surprised by the amount of, and they're really pretty. These churches, like little ships in the middle of the forest in South Carolina. But I also noticed there were a heck of a lot of churches in Indiana. And yeah, I just noticed these flags. You know, we talk about red flags in true crime. Well, yeah, with yellow flags, blue flags. orange flags, all dealing with you know, uh, gas mains and that sort of thing. And so true crime really does, you know, going onto a scene like this really does test your observation skills. Are you able to see anything, and are you able to pay attention to what's sort of around you? If you can't get to the crime scene, what should you do? Just turn around and go home. If the crime scene is on private property, do you just turn around and go home? Uh, what do you do? What do you do with that? And so what I quite like with this picture is it shows you just what you're sort of dealing with. You're dealing with farmland. You're dealing with this sort of situation. This is where um, Barry Morphew, this is the kind of terrain that he lived in for many years. This is the terrain that um, the Delphi killer would have seen every day, right? But they weren't kept out of these places because they lived there. It's not necessarily, but what they would have been very aware of is the fact that other people, either people from outside, or just the fact that there's this territorial attitude, means that if you commit a crime on private property, it's so much harder to investigate it or to stumble onto it. And so you can, in a way, that's right, they had a tree farm. Um, if you stumble, how can I put it? If you commit a crime on private property, you limit the possibility of someone else stumbling on it when people are that sort of territorial about it, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I did enjoy it. John, have you looked at my Instagram? There you get I think, a sense of um, the beauty and to some extent the enjoyment. So, John, I've just posted a link to my Instagram in case you haven't looked at it. So these are some of the Instagram posts. So 1 minute I was at the Great Sand Dunes. That's this over here. Then I flew to Indianapolis, and then the next thing I was in Indiana, and that's these images here. So you guys can check it out if you like. I don't really post true crime things on the Instagram. It's more just what I think is otherwise worthwhile. Okay. What book am I writing next? I'm not writing any books. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Okay, so this is what faced me on the I think it's the south side, right? Yeah, the south side of the bridge. And I think that should give you a good idea. No trespassing. We are watching you. We immediately, can you see that? We immediately report all suspicious activities to the police department, right? And then the signs got worse, like basically talking about the legal side of things and so on. So this is just around the corner from there, trying to find another way, not using the navigator, to the bridge. And this is a beautiful little bridge that I came across on the way there. Right? So that really was quite stunning. What are you guys saying? Where the wind blows just got notified. Okay. Cool. I'm glad you had a look at it. Thanks. So Yeah, no, Terry's right. Terry, good to see you here. Sarah says, we'd all love to meet Nick. Sarah, where are you in America? Thanks a lot, stay away. Visa Mom says boredom is a shortfall of the mind. Okay. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so um even just that, going across the, let's just say, the wrong bridge gives you kind of an insight. And so let me ask you guys, what do you observe when we just look at this video? What do you observe? Let me put it on full screen. What do you see that is of use to us in terms of the Delphi case? I think I'm going to pause it. Hey, pause. Just go back slightly. Okay, so what do you see in that image that is actually of use to us in terms of the whole Delphi thing? Let's see what you guys say. Isolation, okay, but that's okay. It is remote. Forest cover. Well, remember it was winter when this happened. Thick foliage, same thing. This happened in the winter. Um, yes, but what about the river? Gorgeous. There we go. There's the answer. Great. Good to see you as well. So, what you very quickly appreciate is that although there's a river here, it's extremely shallow. And although you, and I'll show you some additional pictures, although it looks shallow, I can tell you that I actually went down in the where the Delphi crime scene, reasonably close to where it happened, and I actually walked right through the river. I walked several times through the river, and it was really, really shallow. When Lisa told me that the crime scene was on the other side of the river, I was like, but that would mean he had to cross the river, you know. And my impression was it hip deep? How could he have gotten somebody else across? And the answer is, well, it's really, really, really shallow. So again, there's another little quick insight from actually going to the scene, right? Um, can can mods just keep an eye on this particular person in chat? Just noticing some snarky comments. Just keep an eye on what's being said there, please. Um, Deborah, Mahabi and I would make sure you saw some great places in Australia. I hope your husband's doing well. Thanks a lot for that. Deborah, you know I've already done a circuit of Australia, right? It's kind of like being there, done that, although it's not to say I wouldn't want to go to Australia again. So, yes, Susan, I agree. Shallow water, shallow, shallow. There we go. Reference to the signage. Okay. Fariba, thanks for joining us. Okay, I understand. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. Just so there I've actually taken a photo of the water, and you can actually see it's shallow from the one side to the other. So it's not like, well, that was just a shallow section there. The entire, from one side to the other of the river is shallow. Can you see that? So Lisa says it was not shallow on that date, and I do not believe they crossed. So there's a really good example of someone who has a particular knowledge of the case, and you're kind of saying, I don't need to go there, and that's got nothing to do with anything. And and I don't know how well you know the case, Lisa, but um, if you wrong, then you still don't actually know where the crime scene is. I'm just saying, if you're, we are now how many years after this crime happened? 6 years. If you wrong, so the question is, did they cross the river or not? If you're wrong about that, 6 years later, you still don't even know where the crime scene is. And it comes down to, well, how deep is the river? And you might say, I think it's quite deep, right? But then you say, no, but how deep is it? Well, one way to find out is to go there. And that's exactly what I've done, right? And so let me ask you this question. If it's very shallow, does that make it more or less likely that they did cross the river? Let's say you say they didn't cross the river. Okay, they didn't cross the river. But if the river is really, really shallow, and we're going to get to why it makes sense that they did cross the river, but if the river is really, really, really shallow, then is it just more or less likely that they did cross the river? But try and keep an open mind. Okay, so that's quite an interesting point. I don't believe we know where the girls were actually killed, though they were found near Deer Creek. So, Lisa, I think you kind of need to kind of go, and I felt this in a very strong way when I was walking there. I was thinking, what made the killer choose this place, in the place in general? And then also, what would have made the killer choose the more specific place in that place? And again, that is all the more reason why to go there in person. And I can't I can't necessarily convince you because you weren't there. I can't necessarily convince you that if you were there, you would have thought the same thing. You may have thought, no, he could have just gone 5 meters off and he would have been concealed by the trees. So it could have been anywhere. And you might insist on that regardless. But that's not really how I saw it. Where the wind blows is I could find it from watching videos. Sarah says he knew the area extremely well. So something else I want to mention is I was really surprised that there was virtually zero sign that a crime had. I'm talking about there was sort of no memorials, no dolls, no flowers um, in this area. I kind of expected to see something like that, and I just didn't. Not at all. There was a little bit of beads on like a board, but there was very, put it this way, I was expecting to see something, and I was quite surprised to see virtually nothing. Um, when I went to the, so it's another bridge. When I went to the bridge where Mallory Beach died, that's kind of more understandable that there's not much there, but there was nevertheless just some flowers. I think they were plastic flowers that were put down in the grass in an obscure spot, but that was nevertheless someone who'd come there and paid their respects and they were still lying there. You kind of get the idea that the people responsible for that park purposefully get rid of all those things so they don't want people to be thinking about it, don't want people to be remembering it, right? Okay, next picture. So something else just to point out is this river is flowing. So the river is actually making a noise. And that in itself creates a muffling effect. The river just not loudly, but it's sort of going over rocks, is making kind of a sound that is nevertheless not soundless. It's not like just a forest with no. Bear in mind, in winter, forest is even quieter than in summer. But it's not just like a forest with no sound whatsoever. There's this, nevertheless, the sound of water, which is to some extent creating a kind of a muffling effect. I was also very aware of the very loud sound of the highway. That's a little bit later on when I was actually walking on the main trail. I was aware of the very loud sound of the cars going by, that sort of, you know, and then it took quite a long time actually for that sound to subside. But then eventually it did subside and you couldn't hear it at all. So it's a loud sound that eventually you cannot hear whatsoever. And so I'm also thinking about that. What kind of soundproofing is this forest providing? And of course, you've got to think about the soundproofing in a lateral sense or horizontal plane, right? Which is whatever it is. But then sound doesn't go like that and then down. So the soundproofing, if you went down into a ravine, would be even greater because it's that the sound won't as easily or effectively go around corners, if that makes sense. Are you guys finding this analysis interesting so far? Is it quite different to what you've heard in the past? Quite refreshing, perhaps, hopefully. Sound can travel above water, that's true. That's a, that's a fairly accurate statement. So can you see again, let me take this comment away. Can you see again just how shallow it is? Look how shallow it is. This whole section here is barely half a foot deep. Can you see that? So something that at face value appears to be a barrier, right? This is really important. Something that at face value appears to be a barrier, meaning the river, actually isn't. So to many people, you'd think, well, there's a river there. I'm here, the river's there, and that's the other side. To someone who knows the area, they know that that river isn't a barrier. I mean, although it looks like a river, it's actually a stream. It's really shallow. Yeah. So yeah, just in terms of attention to detail skills, when you hire a car, you must pay attention to the damage the car already has. And I hadn't noticed this. There was a ding there, and I had to try and remember, did I do this? And I did notice that there was already rust in that part of the ding. And so I was sort of able to, if they were going to say something, say, well, it had to be old because of this. Also, already had dust kind of over this area. But I'm just saying, as a true crime person, you kind of got to sometimes apply that attention to detail in your own orbit, in your own experience. So that was just one of those things. You guys see that it's already rusted. You see that? And that is just why thinking critically, being a critical thinker, paying attention to detail can help you in your everyday life, you know? Okay. So this is driving um, close to where the bridge is. And that's the trailhead. So Sasha says, if you ever played in the woods and someone screamed, it echoes very loudly. So Sasha, let me ask you a question. Did anyone hear screaming? So there were two girls, right? And it was in a park setting, like a open outdoor setting. Did anyone, and it's like a public park as well, did anyone hear screaming, right? And so if you say no, is that because they didn't scream? If you say No. Is it because they did scream and someone didn't hear them? Which one do you think it is? And then the next question to ask is, do you think someone who's got on his mind what the killer had on his mind, which is not just murder, but all those other activities as well. Do you think the killer is thinking about sound? Do you think that's part of his thought process? What do you think? So let me ask that question in another way. What do you think is the greatest threat to the killer being exposed when he's doing whatever he's doing? What do you think is the greatest threat? Sarah says they weren't heard or someone would have come forward. That makes sense. But so another question is, how were they murdered? And when they were murdered, did they make a sound? Were they murdered was there a gunshot? And so the question is, why did no one hear anything? What's the reason for that? So that's right. So the one thing you'd be aware of is being seen. And bear in mind, the forest isn't what it looks like here. This happened, is it February? February the 17th, right? No, February the 13th, wasn't it? Can't believe I can't actually remember. Let me just get it here. February 13, 2017. Yeah, I knew it was close to Valentine's Day. But anyway, February is still kind of the middle, not the middle, but it's winter, right? And that's also a really good point, is that there was a lot of blood, which suggests that that the injuries were quite severe and messy and so on. So it does raise a really important question. Why didn't anyone hear anything? Even so, that they're two girls, not just one. So, it's quite a relevant question. The one answer could be he somehow was able to control them. He somehow maybe asked the one to tie a gag on the other one. That's also possible. But so the killer would have been conscious of being seen, but bear in mind, in winter the trees that had a very thin foliage. These kind of trees would lose their leaves in winter, so they're providing very little line of sight kind of shelter. So he's actually got two problems. The one is that the trees aren't really providing much cover, and the other one is that sound can carry quite far, and so that's why he's got to make so much distance, right? And this now addresses the question of, did he cross the river or not? If he didn't cross the river, he's actually quite close to properties on that side of the river. So just as I couldn't actually get to the bridge because there were people living right there, well, do you really want to commit a crime on that side of the bridge and there are houses right there? Or do you want to go away from that point where the bridge reaches that side, or some distance away from there, to a setting that's more private and more secluded than just on the other side of that bridge? I don't know if that makes sense, what I've just said to you. Kat says they may have been terrified and couldn't scream. I just think, Kat, if you are in pain and somebody says don't scream, I think you would actually scream involuntarily. So that is something that I think one's got to think about. You know, and you do get a sense of sound when you hear birds and then you don't hear birds. You hear traffic and you don't. What is the reason for that? And I think the topography does have a big role to play. Bear in mind, it's a very deep kind of canyon where the stream is, and it goes around like a bend, and so if you're in the bend around the corner, you're going to get shielding not just from to some extent the trees, but also you in a sunken space around the sides. It's almost like there's a hill in the way, and that's going to provide extra soundproofing. So Deborah says, did you see the area where you said down the hill? What was that like? Was it steep? Answer, no, I didn't. I didn't see it. I will tell you that I saw the other area, in other words, the approach to the bridge, and that was extremely steep. It was actually too steep to even, I wanted to go down to the water right next to the bridge when you get to it, and it was simply too steep to do that. So that is definitely a very important thing to note is that there were some extremely steep slopes. How can I put it? Yeah, when you are on this trail, you're surrounded by extremely steep drop-offs, and I'm not really afraid to go off a path and scramble and do that sort of thing. But these were very steep and tricky because it's sort of loose. How can I put it? It's sort of loose branches and roots and um, soil, but you don't feel like some parts are even like cliffs, sheer cliffs, sort of going off there. So the steepness definitely creates access problems for someone who wants to wander off, kind of thing. And the other thing is the way that he was asking them to cross the bridge, to come to him and cross the bridge, also meant if they turned tail and wanted to run back, the options would have been severely limited. And that's another aspect as well. Lynn says it's very useful to see actual places. Let's see where we are with the voting. While only 53% say that it can be incredibly useful. 38% say it does have some value. Okay. Okay, so between those two, it's over 80%. In fact, 90%. But 6% say it's got absolutely no value, waste of time. Okay. Is there anyone who said that it's got no value? Anyone here who said that who's changed their mind? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Okay, so let's actually go through some of these images now. Now you'll notice there's no acknowledgement of Abby and Libby kind of anywhere sort of here. I also noticed, I don't think you can see it in this picture. I don't know if I took a picture of it, but basically on top of this platform, there's a little roof over this thing. Is a security camera. So someone approaching this area now today is going to be on security camera. So that's just one thing that they've done that's changed it. So here is another little insight that you just would not expect if you weren't there. I'm going to see. So yeah, you've got a comment where someone is saying nothing really matters. Someone just went somewhere and they did something crazy, and there's no system, there's no psychology. It's just totally random. And I suppose you could say that, but then you could also argue there's absolutely no point going there because the person wasn't really reacting to the environment. And I would tend to disagree with that because he was a hiker, and for other reasons as well. Linda says, is that the type of terrain where you'd be walking around looking at a stock ticker on your phone? I wouldn't say so. No. What did Tracy say? Of course, it has value. That's why crime scene investigators actually investigate a crime scene. Yeah, but we're not talking about obviously when a crime's committed, the police have got to go there. The question is, does it have value for a how can I put it? Like 5 years later, does it have any value? Does it have any value substantially after the fact? And I don't necessarily mean that you must go to the crime scene. I mean, is there any point in going to entering the fabric of where a case happened? That's kind of what I'm sort of getting at. Silent Moon, are you talking about the Delphi case? So Delphi murders. If you've never heard of it, I'll just put a link. I really can't believe you've never ever heard of it, the Delphi murders. I'll put a link to that case in chat. Yeah, that is quite scary to think about. Uh, I agree with what you say. Okay, so Hippie Plant says that. So here's a good example of something that I didn't know. That by being there, I learned something that I didn't know. And it's on this poster. Let's see if you can see what I saw when I saw this. Let me do this. Is there anything that you notice when you look at just this image here or this map? Is there anything that you notice? Anything that sort of stands out? Um, Amy Cake says that signage looks new to me. Okay. No bridge photo. Okay. Okay, so the thing that I noticed, and you could argue that this is not wasn't there in circa 2017. It wasn't there basically 6 years ago, right? But the fact remains, can you see that you've got little children over here? Can you see that? Little children over there and pictures of little children on this trail, right? I'm just saying that that is what I noticed. And the other thing that I sort of noticed was like while I was walking the trail, I thought this is the kind of trail that would suit um, young children because it's really easy. It's flat. So in other words, the trail you're supposed to do to the bridge and back is very manageable. It's flat. It's fairly short. It's quite pleasant, and you could take really small children there, right? Um, and so that was something that I sort of noticed, and I kind of got the sense that that trail has actually often been used for school children. In other words, history teachers might take them there. That young kids would go there on outings, either organized by teachers or whatever adults, or that they would just go there anyway. They would sort of go there. Um, it was somewhere to go to, right? And while I was there were quite a few people who were going there as well, and they were all quite young, not children, but they were quite fairly young people when I was there myself. So as you can see, just absolutely no sign of any acknowledgement to just think about what we're talking about here. And I mean, I couldn't help feeling, and obviously I'm a true crime person, so obviously that's the way I'm seeing things, but I'm kind of quite shocked that this is a historic trail. It's kind of a trail dealing with the history of the area. And so let's deal with the ancient history of the area, but not the history that something else happened here as well. So it's kind of selective. It's kind of revisionist, saying we're going to remember that, that, and that, but we're not going to remember that and that. Okay, well, if you say so, you know what I mean? So I just found that a little kind of interesting, and I kind of thought to myself, is that right? Like, shouldn't we acknowledge, even if a crime happens, you can say a crime isn't a positive event, or can't we acknowledge that something happened in a particular area? I mean, while I was in South Carolina, they were advertising ghost tours. I don't know, I can't remember what it all was about. Ghost tours, um, all sorts of weird things, and you do this in Savannah. So and it even included true crime. So why couldn't you just acknowledge that something happened when everyone knows it happened anyway? I don't know. So anyway, that was just a thought. So another thing that I think has changed over the years is can you see there's like a tar road over there? Can you see that that's tar? It's tar on top of that. I don't think it was tar at the time. Oh, Gabby and Gabby, Abby and Libby and the whole incident took place. I don't think there was a tar track, and now it's something that you can easily bicycle on. And I saw some guys riding bikes when I was there. Yeah, it was gravel. And so that's another thing just to think about. When it was gravel, uh, what about the noise gravel makes? Must you get away from the gravel? What can you leave footprints in gravel and things like that, right? And so you cross this bridge. It's actually a lovely bridge, and this is where um, I had an insight that I could sort of kick myself. And you might, when you hear me saying this, you might say, "Yeah, but that's so obvious." It is obvious, but it's also not obvious in the way that, well, certainly the way that I experienced it. Um, all of us know that the bridge carried a railway track, right? Let me just say that again. All of us know that this high bridge, its original function was to carry a train track across it. We know that. But have you thought about the fact that coming back from that bridge, that also used to be a train track, and back and back and back, and also that landscaping needed to take place in order to build up the sides in order to support the track, and that is in part why it's got these artificially steep slopes. In other words, there's a narrow corridor, kind of like a ridge, on which the railway track, which this bridge is on, right? Which this bridge is on, links to the Manon High Bridge on the other side. Well, once upon a time, a railway track ran that whole way. And so, literally, what you need to imagine is the railway track that was there all along, and then you peel it away, take it off. And so, what you're left with is the gravel that was, I guess, originally there. But someone did landscaping in order to make like a level, artificially level area just for the railway track, but for nothing else. And that, in a way, created some of these artificially steep slopes. Does that make sense? So if you look in the distance, can you see there's a train? in the distance. And just the way that this was done made me realize, oh, the continuity of a train, that this bridge that we were on was originally a train bridge as well. It's just a couple of pictures of the bridge, and this is walking across the bridge. Jalsi says, I think he had to have an accomplice. Okay, so can you see the train on the other side there? Let's go a little closer. So when I saw that picture, it really gave me a sense of this I mean, we've heard it, but this was made for a train. And then I also realized that in the same way that this is quite hard to explain here, but in the same way that this um, bridge connects to the train track, the actual path today deviates slightly to the right, goes it turns to the right away, and then it comes back in line with it. So that makes sense. And so when I sort of made that connection, I was starting to get a much more real sense of the almost like in a X-ray fashion, the way that the Delphi scene sort of comes together. That it's not just, yeah, it used to be a bridge for a train and throw that information away. That is actually quite central to it. Um, and that is why it's actually quite a boring walk. It's a long, straightish walk to the bridge and then a long, straightish walk back. There's a slight kink in it, but it's basically a straight walk there and a straight walk back. Why? Because you following the train track. And because it's such a kind of a straight walk there and a straight walk back, you kind of have an institutionalized sense for the people who visit that park that you just walk there and you walk back, you walk there and you walk back. And so if someone has done that, the killer, and thought, what if I went off the track? What if I took someone off the track? Would anyone know? And that's already quite a key insight. In other words, it's a very, it's an unusually rigid, simple hike, and someone has turned that rigidity and simplicity to his advantage to say, well, everybody just walks today and walks back, walks today and walks back. Well, what if I can create a scenario where not only do we walk further, but we cross the stream? Well, that's going to create an absolutely safe place, an absolutely safe and secure place to do something, you know. You see what I'm saying? Sarah says, how many of you have bridge phobias? Okay. So that's just a view. Can you see the river at the bottom? Because the river is at the bottom of that. Can you actually see it? I'll play it again, but also try and get a sense of just how steep it is to the river at the bottom. Yeah. And so that's what the bridge looks like today. Totally different. That was quite disappointing, I have to say. They didn't redo the entire bridge, just the first, I'd say, third of it. So what I want you guys to look at again is just look how shallow the river is. It's even shallower here. Um, Look when we look over the railing. Notice how shallow the water is. You see? And there it's actually would it be making a fairly loud sound as it goes over the rock. So let me test your direction skills. Which side of the bridge, as we are looking at it now, did this crime happen? Did the crime happen on that side or that side? Did the crime happen on the left side or the right side of the bridge as we're facing it right here? Did it happen on, that's the right side? Can you see how shallow it is? Or did it happen on the left side? That's the left side. Let's see how well you guys know this terrain. Sasha says right. Marlene says left. You see why it's so important to kind of go to a place, because it really tests your ability to say, okay, well, so where did this happen? And so when you're there, are you able to figure that out? And the answer is the left side, right? It's the left side. So, I mean, I'm quite, in a way, pleased to see so many of you say I don't want to say the wrong thing, but you were mistaken, because it just shows you that it's helping you. Well, I hope it is. It's helping you, taking you to the scene through my footage, understand it a little bit better, getting a better contextual sense. And I can tell you, um, you know, it's not strange to do that. When I went to the Mallory Beach Bridge, Archer's Bridge, I was standing there and I was like, keepers, I can't remember what side of the bridge did this happen. Was it the left side or the right side? And I also had to take a moment to try and just think about that. And you only do that properly when you're there. You don't, when you're not there, someone's taking photos for you, someone's explaining it for you. But when you're there, when you're in that situation where you're on location, you kind of got to figure it out and feel it out yourself. And that's when it becomes real, where you go, oh, I can actually see where this is going. I understand this and I understand that, right? Now, let me just say the following. If the crime had taken place on the right-hand side, right? In other words, if he'd gone down, let's just do this. So now the camera's going to turn to the right, right? Let's stop it there. If the crime had taken place on the right-hand side, it would have been a problem because there's a small little hiking path that goes right down there, right? In other words, of the entire trail, there's one little thing that sort of kinks down like that, down right there. So that wouldn't have worked out, right? It's also on the side, sort of where the highway is, it's closer to that side. Whereas if you went to the left, you're getting further and further away from the main hub of human activity. The other thing is the left side, sorry, the right side is still kind of the public part of it. As you go more and more left, you're going into private property. Does that make sense? There we go. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. So, I mean, that's the regular view you get of the bridge. And you can see that it's starting to, it's obviously more weather beaten, and the wood is starting to crumble. Um, and it's a lot more weathered and whatnot than it was. And one imagines that this sort of thing is why they, removed the first third of the bridge completely, was because it was basically just crumbling, right? I mean, they're not putting any varnish or insect. I'm not sure what they call it. You put something on wood that also protects it from insects. This bridge doesn't have that. So I was kind of tempted to get over the railing and walk over here, and but bear in mind there is no railing, so the safest place to walk would be right in the middle. But that's obviously also the place where your weight would perhaps, um, if there's any fragility to any of these sleepers, which is unlikely, but if there is, I mean, just look at that one. I mean, the surface is a bit broken. I don't know whether the rest of it wouldn't be quite supportive, but I just felt cheap as I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to do that. And I thought about it, and in the end, I just didn't do it. I mean, it's not just that these planks could break, but you could. I mean, there's a little bit of a gap between each one of them, right? So, I mean, the fact that they'd repaired the other part of the bridge shows that it's basically slowly falling to pieces. And so that's also the first thing you see is if you had to climb over the railing, you kind of got to do a little bit of a jump to get across there. And that was also not not the greatest thought, right? So Erica says they were Erica says they were brave to cross that. Bear in mind that the bridge was in a little bit of a better condition. They also quite small and light, but I agree with you, it was quite brave, and I do think this is what I think a lot of people don't think about is what were Abby and Libby after? Like you might say, the killer and the criminal wanted that and that and that, but what was the motivation for Abby and Libby? Why were they there? What were they so excited about? What was the big deal for them? Because bear in mind, it's quite a commitment to say, you know what, there's this bridge, and they're fairly young girls. They're not even boys, it's fairly young girls. We are going to cross, and it's quite a long bridge as well. It's not just a short bridge. It's a long, tall, fairly technically scary bridge. And so, why are they so committed to doing this? Let's see what you guys say. Yeah, you can lose your footing. Yeah, I think I would also crawl over it. I did think of going back there and just trying to go some of the distance and see. That's also true. And I mean, uh, even the alleged killers, even the alleged killer, his daughter was photographed on that bridge, right? Teenage fun and adventure. So I'm just going to give you my opinion. In my opinion, I thought that the girls were going there. They thought they were going to meet, I believe, a really handsome musician, right? And he had said that let's do marijuana on that. So the idea was that they were going to go there kind of and smoke pot, right? It wasn't just let's cross the bridge and and meet someone. They were going to meet someone that they thought was pretty cool, and but also that they were going to enjoy doing something um, that they knew they were not supposed to, and that was sort of a part of the fun element in it, I think. Um, right, and so even from their perspective, and this is, I think, an insight that a lot of people haven't thought about. Even from their perspective, they would have wanted some privacy to do that. Does that make sense? That even from Abby and Libby's perspective, they would want to be a bit removed from the public so that they could have this encounter and do what they wanted to do. Such as it's very common. That's right. But you guys agree that part of it, that's right. Part of it was also this idea of we want to do something that we are not supposed to, or that other people won't like, or and we in a public space, so we need to get to where the public can't see us. So that's why we're going to go to the other side. Does that make sense? Sarah says, is there some sort of info that there was weed involved? Well, if you know about Keegan Klein and you know about the text and the backstory, then I think that's it's not a far-fetched assumption. That's also quite a good point. Okay, so anyway, let's have a look. Anyway, that's just my theory. I could be wrong. Who knows? So there you again just have some visuals of what the river looks like immediately below the bridge, and again you can see it's really really shallow. And if you don't believe me, I went down there. Right, it wasn't easy to get there. I went down there and I was walking here. I actually walked over here, and it really wasn't much more than oh, it wasn't really more than knee deep. It's not a tidal river. This is very far inland. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Can you see how high up this bridge is? Sorry, I think that's the same one. So this was actually after I'd scrambled all the way down. So, if you think I'm exaggerating, or if you think it's an exaggeration to say that it's very steep, well, I can tell you from first-hand experience that I found a way down, and it was extremely steep. It was going quite a way back and sort of down, and it was still really, really steep. I just want to see if I can find a map that shows the way that I went down. I just want to see if I can find it. I think I've got it here. So, so yeah, here's a map that basically just shows the route that I took, and that is right next to. Shall I make it a bit bigger? That is right next to the bridge, right? So the bridge is over here. So then I backtracked quite far back, and then I went across here. This doesn't look nearly as far as it actually was. They had to go a long way along the along the um, sort of ridge, if that's the word, to a point over here where I could eventually come down. So I had to go all of this way to get to a point where I could actually come down. And that's in this area. And so you can see once you're here already, the soundproofing, if you're standing up here, you're not going to be able to hear anything that's sort of around the corner and down there, if that makes sense. And so I came down here, and then I waded all of this distance here, was wading through the river in order to take the photo that's there. Do you follow? This whole distance was in the river, walking in the middle of the river in order to take, to take a picture that way. And then I turned around and walked all the way back through the river and then back up there, right? And then I later on did the same thing. I went all the way back. You had to go much further back here. And this is why I say, like when you say, did the crime happen on the left-hand side, which is that side, or the right-hand side, which is that side? Well, the reason why this would be a really bad spot is there's an actual hiking route down here. It sort of stops there. I'm not quite sure where it stops around about there. So once again, I walked along the river to get to this point to take a photo of the bridge. But this would be a really bad spot because the highway's just there, right? The highway's this side, and obviously going this way is away from this highway. There is a little road over here, but this direction is taking you to away from the public and away and to privacy, this sort of area. Does that make sense? So I'm going to show you another map, and then we'll move on. Here's another map that just shows it a little bit more clearly. There's the highway. This is the sort of railway track, the original railway track, kind of going like that. And then it comes alongside the river, and this is where it becomes so steep. It's wherever the river is close to this track, it's very, very steep, right? And it's steep there again, very, very steep there again. And so there's that other road, and this road's also really important. At what point, and there's the cemetery, at what point does this road get you very close to the river and access to the river where it's not too steep? So you can see I walked quite close to the crime scene. I was quite close to where the crime scene was without crossing the actual bridge, put it that way. So I didn't cross to there and then walk to there. I mean, I would say the crime scene somewhere around about here. Okay. What's next? Are you guys still with me? Okay, so now I'm going to take you to the sort of water level. Just have a look at some of your comments. Again, I think at this level, when you level with can you see just how shallow it is? Can you see how it's not going steeply into there? It's really, really, really shallow. I mean, you can almost do a stepping stone thing across here. It's so shallow. Look how shallow it is there, almost like right across. This is now on the left side, and you can also see it's kind of muddy, kind of sandy. And I'm standing in the middle of this river, and it's really not very deep. And there's a father and his son at the top here. And they actually didn't see me. Even though I was down here, they didn't actually see me. It didn't seem to hear me either. And so anyway, this was just a view from this angle. Can you see just how steep that is? Can you see how steep the slope is over here? It's almost straight down. That's why it's so hard all along here to come down. And that's why as soon as you cross that bridge, there's no other way to get back, or no quick or easy way to get back if you encountered someone on the other side, other than to go back across the bridge. But the bridge is already going to slow you down because you can't just run back across the bridge. So it was actually quite a clever strategy used by the killer. This is at water level. Let's play that again. Can you see how shallow it is? Can you also see the rivers moving slowly? It's not a stagnant river, it's moving, and the movement's creating a little bit of noise suppression. So that is something that surprised me. It was, and bear in mind, I think it would be even shallower in winter. There'd be less water in winter. I was surprised. I thought it would be at least twice or three times deeper than it actually was. So there I am, actually standing in the river. There you just get a sense of how fast the water is actually moving, and that the water is creating kind of a sound effect. So what we are seeing in that scene, that is towards the crime scene, right? The way the river's flowing towards us. So the crime scene is in this area, and the river's flowing this way, and then under the bridge, and the crime scene is in this sort of, if you follow the river, you go into this dark area, and then it curves around. Does that make sense? But can you see how it just is very, very, very shallow? Sorry, let's go back. Let's go back to that video. Terry, I don't think there's any snow melt. There's not really too many mountains in the area. I could be wrong. Yeah, quite close. Okay. So again, this I kind of found quite astonishing, and you know, there's certain things that aren't part of the true crime narrative that you simply don't hear about, and this is a good example. So you are walking through a historic park, and it's sort of remembering this and remembering that, and so going a little bit back, there was another little hiking trail, and there were a couple of benches in memory of this person, in memory of that person, and yet nothing in memory of Abby and Libby. And I just thought, I don't know if that's very nice. I mean, um, because it's not I don't know, like I thought it's to me almost, it's almost dishonest. I don't know. I suppose you could say, I don't know. I thought it was kind of inappropriate, but maybe not. What do you guys think? Shouldn't there be like something that's in memory of them, a bench that's in memory of them or something? And unless there isn't, I missed it. Silent murmur, that's an interesting point. Could it have been deeper at the time? Well, I guess it's possible. If it's true, then you're ruining my argument, but I guess it is possible. So this is the other trail that I'm talking about that is on um, the right-hand side, and this is why the killer wouldn't want to go into the right-hand side. It's one reason why I wouldn't want to. And so you can see there's the railway track or the original trail, right? There's the bridge. Can you guys make this out? There's the bridge. And then if you go back slightly, it's not a very long way. There's another path that deviates to the right that goes all along this section here, and then it kind of makes a U-turn, which is why this entire area would be a very bad spot to kind of commit a crime, because you've got lots of people walking around over here, right? And then you've got the highway over there, so it just wouldn't be a terribly good spot to do this. Meanwhile, on the other side, there's nothing. There's no official path going off on this side. And bear in mind, the bridge continues there, and the crime scene is basically somewhere here. Maybe there, I don't know. So this was going down that particular trail on the right-hand side. I must admit, when I remember the footage from the investigators, I remember them walking and they were up to their chests in water. So I think you are 100% right that the water was deeper earlier on. So that's a really good point. But I think it's equally true to say that I'm sure there were shallow sections in that river, and someone with a very good knowledge of the area perhaps knew where that shallow section was. Does that make sense? I just want to see, was it Silent Murmur who left that? uh, that's a fantastic point, but it does remind me of footage of the searchers. They sort of arm in arm going down, and they're very deep in the water. Let's see if I can find that picture. Delphi police. Can't. Well, I guess this is the best one I can find. But it seems to be a different river. This is the Yellow River. It's actually a different river. It didn't do much good. But I do. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. You see them in the water, arm in arm, and they're actually quite deep in the water. I don't quite see it now. I don't see it at the moment. By the way, this is what Richard Allen looks like now. It lost a lot of weight, right? That's what he's looking like at the moment. Okay. So you can see I was there on quite a beautiful day. And can you see the, not sure what they call that, but that gave it a really atmospheric quality, like quite a fairy tale quality. Like the air was sort of alive. So I'll play that again. Sarah says, what's your opinion of Alan's guilt or innocence? John says, they can often fluctuate. So, I mean, you know, you realize going there, and we realize having this discussion that it's actually quite a complicated question. You can't argue that it is definitely extremely shallow, but you also can't argue that it's too deep or it's deep. It's sort of kind of a mixed bag argument. It's not quite as simple as it seems, right? Okay, I'm almost done. I've just got a couple more images to share. Here's another one. Again, that's just sort of at ground level, just showing you what the water sort of looks like at ground level, sort of walking through the water. It's moving, it's making a sound, um, and so that is went all the way to the other side. There you can see just how shallow it is. Well, and look at sand that's there and stones, not silt, it's not mud that's made it shallow. Quite pretty, right? I actually found a path on the opposite side that the deer were using. So this is another bench that I came across in memory of Delphi's, I guess, high school classmates, 1967. And again, so are there no memories of Abby and Libby? You know, if you can remember high school classmates, what about those two, mates? And so I also took this photo just showing the woods behind this particular plaque. But it just seemed like they were remembering everything except Abby and Libby. And that was just a very pretty barn just before you reach the end of the trail. And then I saw this little squirrel, sorry, rabbit at the end of the whole thing. And so that's it. That's the basically a summary of the things that I went and looked at. Like I said, you might say, I can't believe you didn't even actually walk on the bridge. I did actually intend to, but when I got to the bridge, the fact that half of it had been removed because it had been crumbling, I did think I might come back another day, like the next day, and possibly walk some of it. And then I just, in the end, just decided I wasn't going to do it. Silent Murmur says, I used to work at a hospital that people thought was haunted, but I never experienced any phenomena. Okay. I think the reason is because it's a very negative association. It's not like, I think the idea is that you go for a nice walk and you enjoy the pleasant surroundings, and it's supposed to be a positive, happy experience. And I think, I think the crime is seen as a blight on Delphi. I think it's seen as even worse the fact that a local apparently has committed this crime. I think it's seen as bad for tourism, bad publicity, just bad all round, right? Isn't that doesn't that make sense? Delphi area is an Indiana farming area, totally. Adrian says, I believe Logan was involved. That's what makes this case quite sort of complicated. So I'm going to share a theory of mine, and my theory is that um, how I'm just going to say the perpetrator, how the perpetrator um, got in touch with Abby and Libby, in my opinion, was that he used the Anthony Shots profile, right? And that is not to say that the killer created the Anthony Shots profile, but that the killer was someone, maybe one of several, who had access to the Anthony Shots profile and who could, for perhaps a fee, interact with um, people who were interacting with the Anthony Shots profile, right? Um, if that's true, what is incredible and kind of hard to believe is that Anthony Shots, the profile, as far as I know, arranged a meeting with Abby and Libby where it was arranged. But that means if other people had access to it, then they knew about that or knew about that kind of relationship. But then, and you might say that that's very unlikely because he would be giving, he would be revealing, he would be, yeah, other people would know what he was doing. But the converse of that is if these other people that knew what he was doing were, I don't want to say the P word, were basically, um, to put it mildly, objectionable characters. But I think you know what I mean when I say the P word. Um, they can't come forward because then they're saying, well, I'm a P. You know what I'm saying? And so, in that sense, he probably expected his secret to be safe. But even having said that, it's kind of a crazy situation, isn't it? It's also possible that there was more than one person using the Anthony Shots profile, and more than one person was present at the crime, and that's exactly what we're talking about. That's also another possibility. In 2017. Okay. Fractured Fairy Tale says, I just bought your book. Okay. Well, I hope you do read it at some point. It's also set in in Colorado, and it's also a farm rural based crime. So the victim in that crime came from California to Colorado. So it's another case where someone came from somewhere else. Yeah, and the animal fur, the animal hair, I think is really interesting. Also, the fact that they found clothing that appeared to be the clothing of Bridge Guy in Richard Allen's closet. I really found that quite interesting. I think I've got a couple more final couple of images, and um, then we can skedaddle. So this is just walking across the bridge. I just thought it was quite interesting. The sign they're saying wrong way. I mean, Was there any point where Abby and Libby thought we're going the wrong way? We're going across this bridge and we shouldn't be doing this. And then obviously there's the point when the person waiting for them at the other end wasn't Anthony Schultz, or wasn't who they expected. And he was then deliberately taking them down a wrong way, a way that no one in the public would sort of would get to by accident, right? And that's just a parking area. We know that Abby and Libby were actually dropped off. Weren't they dropped off in a parking area a little bit further down the line? And Richard Allen, apparently, he said that he walked the bridge that day. So this is the Carroll County Courthouse. Um, I ate a pizza across the road from it, and then this is towards Alexandria. But I just want to show you the pictures of Richard Allen's home. Where is that? This made me think of the barn where Superman lived. In Kansas, Smallville. Just made me think that looks like where Superman, just what one has seen in movies. Anyway, so that is Richard Allen's home, and I wanted to show you a view that showed the road that goes to the south side of the bridge, very close to it. And it did make you think that didn't they sometimes go for walks before anything had happened there? Didn't some of the locals just go for walks? Didn't some of the local kids just go for walks down there? Um, didn't he? And so it's also quite weird seeing yellow flags on his lawn. I mean, it's got nothing to do with crime. It's to do with um, cables or gas or something. But you get a sense also of the relative security he has from this line of trees, which in a way is an analogy for the line of trees at the crime scene. On the other hand, you've got this incredible exposure. If you're standing there, you can see right into his garden. There's the shed. That actually looks like it could be a chair or even a wheelchair. That seems to be the fire pit. And so I was actually quite surprised that the house seemed pretty well looked after. The grass doesn't seem any longer than usual. It actually seems like it's still fairly well taken care of. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Good point. But nevertheless, that the building is in Delphi, and they have had a couple of hearings in that building. This is just another angle from that. And there was something on this wall. I'm not quite sure what that notice, probably no trespassing or something. And I don't know if you can see in that picture just how close his home is to the bridge. It's really, really close. I don't know if you guys can make that out. So anyway, that's the pharmacy, CVS, where he worked. It wasn't quite as obviously close to the sheriff's department as I thought it would be, but it, yeah, obviously is fairly close. And so that is where he worked. And I actually drove from his house to the pharmacy, and you cross the river every single day. And that's the route that he would drive every single day as well. One of the biggest buildings in the whole town. So, in a weird way, I don't know. Anyway, that was back in Indianapolis, just the sun going down. Okay, so that is it from me. Someone asked, where are you going to next? Where's that comment? Um, so I've been all through South Carolina, and I've sort of um, covered that. And so I do want to talk about that maybe tomorrow. So maybe tomorrow this time we can go to Moselle together, and we can go to um, uh, Hampton and the now the Parker Law Offices. I was right there, and the railway track where the great grandfather died, and everything started there. So, are you guys up for visiting South Carolina with me tomorrow around about this time? Yes, in a live session. Yeah. So, Sarah says, will the hearing be broadcast? So far, I think so. Um, so just go back to the original poll. How much is visiting the scene or even the general area really worth in true crime? So let's just see what you guys say. Like, did you learn anything by going there with me? Like, remember we've gone to Indiana via 4 cases. So did you learn anything, or did you think about anything that you haven't thought about in the same way or in a different way in the Gabby Petito case? Like, have you ever thought of the Gabby Petito case related to Indiana, right? Has that in any way just enriched your knowledge of the Gabby Petito case? And then same with Bryan Kohberger. Has my experience being in America, and just this idea of talking about the traffic stops and so on, has that improved your knowledge of that case? But specifically, do you think that those stops were random, or do you think that um, someone ordered those stops? Because I don't know, I saw a heck of a lot of tailgating while I was driving, and no one ever seemed to get, no one got pulled over for tailgating while I was driving, and that's apparently what he got pulled over for. Then we get to Barry Morphew. Do you think the Indiana narrative has any relevance to that story? And then finally, Delphi. Do you think going to that space, that place, do you think that tells us anything? Do you think you've got a better idea of what? So let me just say this: when I went and I was walking down there, I got a really strong sense of how he could, as Anthony Shots, tell the story of walk down this path that you've walked down a hundred times, because a lot of kids do, but just go further, go across the bridge, and I'll meet you there. And you just kind of get the sense that it was logical and easy to lure them. You got that sense of luring, of the luring psychology, quite strongly when you walked there, or at least I did. I sort of felt that psychology. I felt, yes, I can see how. he could think that, and I don't know if that makes sense. And so out of those 4 cases, did going there and being there just open up a little bit of another dimension to you, yes or no? And if you say no, then it's like, okay, there you go. I nevertheless, even if I went somewhere and I didn't find much out, like when I went to Alexandria, I nevertheless, one thing I've learned about rural Indiana is that even the rural roads are tarred. That's like totally not the case in my country. In my country, you just go slightly rural and you've got dirt roads. We've got miles and miles and miles of dirt roads. It's really amazing seeing just how civilized the farm land, farm communities are in Indiana. That just for starters, you've got tar roads. A tar road instead of a dirt road makes a massive difference. Definitely makes a massive difference. So let's read some of your comments. Tracy says the condition of the bridge. Chelsea says I learn a lot. That's good to hear. Thanks for that, Sarah. Beverly says tailgating causes death accidents. Can't see in advance. Yeah, it's not good to do. You do see it quite often. Deborah says you've given us exclusive photographs and news of all these cases. I have learned heaps. Sounds good. Deborah, we hope your husband's doing okay. Is he doing okay? I agree with that. Yeah, it seems that way. Either it was that way, or it is very unlucky, I guess. Interesting comment from Kat. Terry says, I grew up in Michigan and avoided D-Town at all costs. Helena says, tailgating is never a reason to be pulled over. Do you have something near my left nostril? Really? Is that right? Let's do a quick check. Make sure. Left nostril. I don't know. I don't see it. Maybe my eyes aren't as good as they were. Where the wind blows says, let's just take that away. I like the Delphi River and seeing the changes to the bridge and entrance. So, one of the weird things that I take away from visiting Delphi is that sense of the incredible control and privacy, access denied, you can't walk here, you may not go there. And it's basically was a public road going to a bridge, which is a tourist attraction. Now it's closed. Now it's like, we do not want you to go there. We'll prosecute you if you do go there. And it's like, really? There's that. And then there's also this thing of, let's remember this, that, and that, but not Abby and Libby. And isn't that how crimes happen? We don't want to talk about certain things. We don't want to remember certain things. We don't want to acknowledge certain things. And I guess it's easier said than done when you're an outsider. Like if you don't live in Delphi, maybe it's totally different. This is associated with you. Not really. It's something that happened in your town. If you say it's associated with you, then it is. But I mean, it's nevertheless a fact that something happened there. Is that not a kind of history? And what does that say about you when you acknowledge some history but not other history? I don't know. So I don't know whether it's right or wrong. It was something that I noticed, and I'm quite aware of the attempts in different communities. Boulder, Colorado is another one. Moscow, Idaho is another one. To forget something that has happened there. And is that the right approach? Is the right approach to try to forget when something terrible happens? Is that a way to get back to normal, or is that a way for history to repeat itself? It's an open question. Now, how should we deal with things like this? Another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is when a crime happens in a house or a building, should you demolish it? Should you try and forget, or can't you just work with human psychology where you paint it and then you change some of the structure and then you can still use that dwelling? Well, we're such weak creatures psychologically that if we think about something, it's so terrible. Are we not capable of more in that sense? Aren't we stronger beings psychologically? Stephanie, I know this for a fact because I'm just down the road from me. It's quite funny to say. It's 25 to 2 in the morning, and I think you must go to bed, Stephanie. Yeah, there we go. I have to be up in a few hours for an appointment. Good night, Stephanie. So I do want to do this exact same thing tomorrow, but taking you guys into South Carolina. And I also want to, so there are a couple of other places as well. Maybe even do a Van Gogh letters in the morning. We'll see. I've got a bit of time. I'm in New York for a while. But I also think it's time for another Van Gogh letters. I had an incredible trip into New York with the Uber driver, and he loved my Team Peachtree story. The way that the Team Peachtree name came about with the whole two trees thing and the one in the shade, whatever. I wonder if I can show you something. The last thing I want to show you, did I send it to myself? Oh, yeah, it is. So just for those of you who are interested, this is what the peach tree looks like right now. Can you see on the right? I know it's quite dark, but on the right, the tree has still got most of its leaves. The yellow and the green's got most of its leaves, whereas the tree on the left doesn't have any leaves. Quite interesting. And there's Timmy. Quite interesting, right? Okay, guys, I just want to thank everyone who's been here. I want to thank you guys for your interest, for the super chats. I mean, at one point, it looked like there were going to be 5 people in chat. Now they're 215. I'm happy with that. But really good having you here. And I'm really glad that some of you are as interested in the real places where these incidents occurred as I am. And as interesting as these real places are, the areas around them and connecting them are also interesting. I've really loved being in America. I love your country. I'm not looking forward to going back to winter, but I'm looking forward to seeing my little dog. And hopefully he's looking forward to seeing me. Well, there he is. It's cold there, so it's going to be going from T-shirts here to beanies and whatnot there, but it is what it is. I am looking forward to coming back to America and going down the East Coast all the way to Florida, and then going to Texas and just taking in the places I haven't seen. And I might do that in May next year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. So anyway, for the rest of you guys, I hope you found this interesting. You must have a good night. Shammy Cake says, I'll look out for notifications. Linda says, very interesting. Thank you. So thank you guys. Thanks to the mods. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.